Excited to introduce Jeremy and Shivani. I am going to go ahead and go through the introduction in Jeremy's bio. So Jeremy Rasmussen is the Chief Technology Officer of Abacode, a company providing managed cybersecurity and compliance advisory services to businesses across all industries. He is also the adjunct professor at the University of South Florida and founder of the USF White Hatters Computer Security Club. Since 2000, he has taught courses in cryptography and network security, ethical hacking, digital forensics and investigations, mobile and wireless securities. For 25 plus years, he has performed R&D of cyber solutions for government and commercial customers. Jeremy is a CISSP and certified ethical hacker, and he was named 2017's Tampa Bay Technology Leader of the Year. So very excited to have Jeremy here today to speak with us on his talk, Ransomware, the Real Pandemic. And with that being said, I'll go ahead and let you take it away, Jeremy.
Thanks, Wilfredo. Hope everybody can hear me okay. I'm very excited to speak here again. I think this is my 5th year speaking at BSides Tampa Bay. Definitely going to be a different situation this year than usual. I think we had almost 1,000 or more people last year in person right before the pandemic really started hitting. So that was kind of the last big event I attended before COVID struck. But you know, COVID has been bad. It's been a change. It's caused a lot of issues. But I'll tell you what, the real pandemic out there, from what we've seen, is ransomware, because we've just seen it hit so many companies. We get about a call a week now to come in and try to clean up. And unfortunately, those are not managed services customers of ours. I'm CTO of Abacode, which is a company that does managed cybersecurity and compliance programs for companies. And they, we know that you can't find enough people, qualified people to do this work. And to hire a whole team to do it would take, probably 6 or 8 people. And most, mid-sized enterprises can't afford that. So we try to put together solutions, to manage something as an outsourced program for somebody and become just a part of the team, really. And so we, our managed services customers, knock on wood, they don't get hit by ransomware because we're going to try to see something and stop it before it becomes a real issue. But the companies that don't have that in place, that's kind of what I'm going to talk about, is some stuff we've seen over the last year, specifically around Maze ransomware and some other strains, the types of TTP tools, techniques, and tactics, or procedures, whatever. There's different ways you can call that acronym. But the way that these attackers are behaving and causing mischief, and hopefully give you some information that we will, you'll be able to use in your environment to lower the threat, lower the risk of getting hit by some of these really bad attacks. So having said that, let's advance to the agenda. I want to make sure, can you guys see?
So Jeremy, we did lose you for a second. If you're trying to share your screen, I'm not seeing it at the moment.
All right, let me try again. How about now?
See that.
Awesome. Again, thanks for joining me. We're going to talk about today the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which is a way of analysis and analyzing the TTP of our attackers, the adversaries that are out there. We're going to look at the changing landscape over the last year. I do want to mention, some things about the SolarWinds attack, because it's been in the news lately, not necessarily a ransomware, but we're going to apply the MITRE ATT&CK framework principles to that, and then apply them to the Maze ransomware itself, and show you what happens during a forensic cleanup and investigation, which is unfortunate, for those companies that aren't proactive and don't have the protections in place. These are some of the things that can happen, and these are the steps we take to go through and clean up, and then give you some advice on stuff you should be doing right now. So let's dive right into it. The concept of an attack kill chain has been around for more than a decade. I think Lockheed Martin was the first ones that came up with it. In military terms, a kill chain is find the target, reconnoiter the target, destroy the target. From a cyber standpoint, we're looking at these are the typical things that an attacker will do, and we can kind of key on these indicators of compromise and stop stuff before it becomes a real problem in the environment. And so MITRE Corporation, which is a nonprofit, government think tank type company, came up with this, very detailed list of what I would say are tools, techniques, and tactics, or some people say they're called techniques, tactics, and procedures. I don't know. The acronym changes depending on whom you ask, for how our adversaries behave. And I remember going back to like 1999, 2000, I was reading Hacking Exposed, like the first edition, and it talked about this is the methodology that hackers use, reconnaissance, trying to find the, more information about the target you're going to go after, and then, finding some kind of vulnerability to exploit, gaining a foothold, and then moving from there, lateral movement, pivoting, escalating privileges, and doing your mischief. And that really hasn't changed that much. But what they've done is they've really looked at some indicators of compromise associated with those types of things on the kill chain, so that the game is for us as the defenders, as blue teamers, to try to stop the kill chain, stop these activities as early as possible up there towards the reconnaissance and resource development, and even before initial access. But maybe even after initial access happens, we don't want it to get to the execution and persistence and privilege escalation stages. We want to stop it, because down at the bottom of the kill chain is impact, and that's when the attackers are disrupting your business and your operational processes, and it's really too late by that time. They're encrypting files, they're demanding a Bitcoin ransom, and all that stuff. There has been a little bit of criticism, interesting to note, that of actually having reconnaissance and resource development up there in the top of the chain, because like, what can you do about it, right? And I have this certain perimeter that I'm trying to protect, or this concept of my environment. What could I possibly do to limit reconnaissance? Well, there actually are some things you can do. You can train your people not to give out information, right? Right. Empower them to be the first line of defense through cyber awareness training. Don't speak to people on the phone and give out data. Don't give it out over email. Respond to phishing attempts and stuff like that. In terms of them marshaling the resources to come after you, I don't know if there's that much we can do. We can always try, from a law enforcement standpoint, to disrupt the international supply chain for these hacking groups. But as I'm going to show you later on, they're very organized, very well organized. They even have like affiliate programs now, and have their own red team, threat hunters and so forth. It's really amazing how organized and business-like they are. But just looking through the rest of the chain, initial access is where the attacker is gaining a foothold in your environment, and we'll talk about some of those initial infection vectors that they typically use. Execution is trying to remote execute code to spawn a process, set up a keystroke logger, scrape memory for passwords, things like that. Persistence is really a backdoor, a covert channel, so they can get on later. A lot of times we'll find an attacker will exploit some vulnerability to get into a system, and then they'll fix it so that nobody else can get in, because now that system belongs to them. Like, it's their system. And so, but they will set up a backdoor for themselves so they can get in later through a normal account login. Privilege escalation is the idea that you don't want to just be an unprivileged user. You want to have root level or administrative level access so you can do more. Especially if you have like domain admin, it's game over, right? You can do whatever you want. You can insert a rootkit down at the lowest level that is maybe even under the operating system, so that you can forge back results to any antivirus or endpoint protection that's running, and lie to it about what you have there. So if you have that level of access, you have the keys to the kingdom. The only way to get rid of somebody when they have that is really like a low level format, and reinstall the operating system from reinstall files from backups. It's sad to say, but that's what has to be done. Discovery and lateral movement and collection is all moving around looking for things. And you might ask yourself, what are attackers looking for? Well, in my experience, a lot of these attackers are looking for product plans, 5-year plans, strategic plans. They're looking for stuff out there because, like, you could hire a group of R&D people to come up with a new product. That's going to cost a lot of money and sometimes it comes to nothing, right? You spend hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on developing a product and never really comes to fruition. Or you could hire a couple of hackers for a few bucks who will go in, break into that system and steal all their product plans, and then you have access to those without having ever had to pay for the R&D. So other nation states like Russia and China and these other ones are really into that idea of just stealing data. They don't really actually see it as a negative thing. They see it as a positive for their country, that they're gaining this data, this intelligence for them. Everything's fair game that they can hack into. Command and control, there's always going to be some connection out to some external site that's going to allow this remote person that has access into your system now to issue additional commands and gather data. There's going to be some staging of data before exfiltration. So a lot of times we can see 7-zip files and RAR files and different types of caches of data that are getting staged to be sent out. And then exfiltration is how do they get that data out? And if they know that you're not really looking, if they know that you don't have the capability of surveillance on your own environment, which I would say a good portion of companies do not, don't even know what's going on their networks. I mean, for example, we get hired to come in and red team or pen test a network, and we're going to come in kind of stealthy, unannounced, after hours, obfuscate our methods, and very quiet, low and slow, as they say. And a lot of times they won't pick up any of the activity. They're like, hey, when are you going to start the test? And we're like, we're already finished with the test, and we have domain admin, so the test is over. But that because they didn't have that, they didn't know what they didn't know, and that's the issue. So a lot of times these attackers don't really care if anybody sees what they're doing because nobody's looking, and so they'll just be as noisy as they want to. But other times they know that there's some sophistication there, there's some monitoring capability, and they'll interleave data to make it look like regular traffic going out of the network, and so that it can't be detected as easily. And of course, as we talked about before, impact is the idea of doing something naughty, encrypting all the files and demanding a Bitcoin ransom, or threatening to dox the files out there to the public. As you know, we've gone through a lot of changes over the last year. I mean, this whole idea of the pre-COVID view being this kind of castle that you're guarding and this protected perimeter that everything traverses through the firewall, that was a little bit of a pie in the sky notion anyway for the last few years, right? As we've been migrating to the cloud, you're using software as a service, you've got mobile and wireless, so the perimeter was already kind of fuzzy. But especially now, so that everybody's working from home, people are outside the traditional protected perimeter. Imagine like how much you accomplish on social media. We use LinkedIn for HR and hiring, used Twitter for help desk support, use Facebook for public relations, Instagram. So you're like running a good portion of your business on social media. But is that coming under IT security, visibility, and access control? Probably not. It's probably being run by like the marketing department or whatever, and those people are typically security amateurs. We did whenever we do an assessment for for an organization, we first need to take stock of where all their important critical data are, right? And so I'm just thinking of we did a professional sports team. I won't say who. It was not in Tampa Bay. It was another one, a very prominent billion-dollar organization, professional sports team. And the first thing we did is try to find out where all their data were. And so they're using a SaaS system for payroll, one for finance, one for ticketing, CRM, customer relations, baseball analytics. Well, I gave kind of away what sport it was. They had brought in some guys from Google to do analytics for them. And so like everybody else was on Office 365 and Azure, and these Google guys like Google stuff. So they were on GC Suite and Google Cloud Drive. And so like finding out where all the data were and who had control of it and what was the status of multi-factor authentication, almost impossible. The IT, they even had these tenants on their network from outside vendors, and they weren't even part of the network, but they had domain rights and domain access and emails and all that stuff. So oh, the funny thing was they didn't even know if their ticketing system was on premises or in the cloud. We had to like find it. So it's funny that these big multi-billion-dollar corporations sometimes don't even know where their data is to start with. So you got to find that, understand how to protect it and all that. And a lot of times it's not out. It's not where you think it is, and it's not being protected the way you think it is. So we have this whole idea of zero trust now. It's not just a buzz phrase anymore. The new normal is assume that you have a breach, like somebody's already inside your network, and how do we limit what they can get access to, and segment them off, apply authentication everywhere, and limit their ability to get to important data. It's like the whole idea of the Navy builds ships knowing that they have to reach their destination even if they have a leak. So you can't keep every drop of water out of a ship, but it still has to go where it needs to go. That's the idea of our new post-COVID world. There's going to be somebody in your organization that's not supposed to be there. How quickly can I figure out that they're there, eradicate them, and correct that problem so it doesn't happen again? So looking at the SolarWinds attack from a MITRE ATT&CK framework perspective, there's some really great write-ups on this done by FireEye and CrowdStrike and some others. And they came to realize that it all started with this Sunspot malware, which actually infected the build environment of SolarWinds. So it established persistence with scheduled tasks that triggered at boot time. Very familiar with that through our MITRE ATT&CK framework, because persistence is one of the first things you do. It uses stealth, through encryption methods to hide its source code and hide any logs. It was very clever because they would monitor and inject any running process of msbuild.exe, which is the Visual Studio build process. So they would, whenever a build was getting ready to kick off for the Orion software, they would scan for that and inject their Trojan horse in there. And also they disabled debug warnings during the builds so that they couldn't see if there was any errors thrown or warnings. It couldn't, that caused by their Trojan, the build people, the DevOps folks couldn't see it. So it was very, very stealthy, clever how that went in. The point of Sunspot was to put in place Sunburst, which was if you want to really read an incredible write-up, FireEye, and I think, to their credit, SolarWinds, FireEye, CrowdStrike, and all these have been open about information sharing, because this is such a widespread attack, and they wanted to make sure everybody, had as much information as possible. They gave very detailed information down to the, GUIDs and processes spawned and network connections out, exactly how this thing behaves, so we could see. But the whole point of Sunburst was really to allow additional reconnaissance, command and control, things like that, the various things that we see in the attack chain, right, the kill chain. Teardrop and Raindrop are really, different versions of droppers that were put in by Sunspot to allow them to just put in a post-exploitation framework. If you're not familiar with Cobalt Strike Beacon, it's a 4-pay version of a pen testing framework like Metasploit framework, but there's like a million cracked versions of it out there on the dark web. So they just use some, Trojanized version of that, and it gives you all kinds of great, remote access capabilities, command execution, keystroke logging, file transfers, privilege escalation, etc. So that was the point of all that, is a dropper for this exploit framework. But my question is, what was the initial vector of attack? I've researched this and I have not found anywhere online. And if you can find it, put it in the chat, or submit it through a Q&A or whatever. What was the initial vector of attack that allowed the attacker to insert the Sunspot Trojan into the build process in the first place? Nobody's admitted to that or how that came about. My guess is it probably wasn't very sophisticated. It was probably along the lines of what we see with any of these attacks. Like if they don't have a great surveillance capability with a SIEM, a security information event management solution, and 24/7, eyes on glass, people watching for certain types of attacks, they may have missed that initial dropper that allowed them to infect the build environment. The sad thing about all this is when they put out these builds, they were signed with the SolarWinds certificate. So if you're a SolarWinds customer, you were getting signed software that was supposed to be trusted software from SolarWinds, but it came to you Trojanized and, and full of Cobalt Strike Trojans. All right, well, let's apply the MITRE ATT&CK framework to Maze ransomware. And before we do, what do you think the initial vector of attack is most often? I'm going to put a little poll here in our chat. What do you think the initial vector of attack is most often for ransomware? And my answer comes from empirical observations, things that we've seen in our own work over the last couple of years. What do you think? A lot of people guessing phishing and social engineering, and that's kind of the conventional wisdom, and that people are the weakest link. But I have some news for you. This is my own research, and this is borne out by groups like Coveware and some other ones that do ransomware negotiations. 60% of the attack vector is remote access, remote desktop misconfiguration. 30% through phishing, social engineering, and then 10% of like missing patches, misconfiguration. So I've seen remote desktop port 3389 used in dozens of successful attacks. It's great for allowing quick access to files, opening applications, troubleshooting problems. If you're an admin, it's awesome. But if not configured properly, that can be really opening the floodgates for adversaries to come in. And I should mention, I'm not just talking about Windows RDP, I'm talking about any third-party software that allows access. For example, LogMeIn, TeamViewer, Remote PC, Zoho Assist, ConnectWise Control. Oldsmar, exactly. Over Super Bowl weekend in Oldsmar, there was somebody on the night shift watching the water treatment plant, and then they saw the cursor moving on the screen, and they started, it just started moving, and somebody started clicking on things with TeamViewer. Now, that might have been a normal occurrence of their IT department, except for maybe a couple of things. It was the middle of the night. That doesn't mean some IT people. I got an email from our IT person at 4 in the morning, so that's weird. But the other thing was that user was changing the sodium hydroxide levels of the water supply to 100 times the normal amount. Okay, so yeah, that's bad. They were poisoning the water. This is horrible. So obviously, a few things here. You don't want to be ever having your industrial control systems or SCADA systems connected to you and to the system that could allow remote access. But let's look deeper. How do you think that attacker gained access to the TeamViewer in the first place? Well, I think you would have to say that it's probably not very sophisticated. A lot of RDP abuse comes through just simple brute force password guessing on an internet exposed surface. I mean, really? Yeah, an improperly configured service that allows unlimited attempts starting with no password, password equals username, password equals password, or whatever. If you've ever done any red teaming or password cracking, you know the drill, right? You try a dictionary attack or a word list first, and then a hybrid attack where you're spelling things backwards and forwards. You're adding a number and a question or exclamation point at the end or whatever. And you might have rainbow tables, which are hashed versions of certain lengths of all passwords. But in looking at online, Malwarebytes said that this kind of script kiddie level attack of just brute force password guessing continues to be on the rise. And another thing they do is called credential stuffing. So here you find a valid set of user ID and password combinations, usually stolen from some other data breach, and then you try out those combinations on other systems, which is exactly why obviously you should never reuse a password anywhere across multiple accounts. Just an example, my company Abacode was doing what we call a proof of value, where we deploy our solution for a customer to show them, we get them hooked on the crack, we'll give it to you for free for a few weeks. Once you realize you can't live without it, then we'll start charging you, that kind of thing. But we deployed this SIM. If you're not familiar with SIM, Security Information Event Management, it's the type of software that collects log data from your firewall, your network infrastructure, your servers, endpoints, cloud, SaaS, API connectors, anything that you can syslog or pour all this into one aggregation server. Then you run all these correlation rules on there, something like 30,000 pre-configured rules looking for indicators of compromise, with a constantly updated threat feed. So when things like the Exchange server bugs, which we saw a few weeks ago, come out, you'll immediately get an update on there and then of new things to look for. And then you have your analysts looking at this, eyes on glass 24/7, and popping up these alerts and then running them to ground, making sure they're handled. Within hours of deployment of the solution, we saw that somebody was pounding on RDP port 3389 from Russia, and we were able to tell them, hey, we need to fix that. And now the alert from the SIM just says brute force password guessing attempt on this box coming from this IP address. But what's the deeper issue there is why are you not limiting the number of login attempts? Why are you not whitelisting that to the to just one trusted IP? And all these other things, layers, VPN. You want to go push this through a bastion host and all this stuff. We looked at the deeper security architecture issues and try to advise them on that stuff. So Maze is especially a pain in the butt from a business point of view, because the people that run Maze are really good business people. Starting back in 2019, they're the ones who kind of began to use some novel extortion methods. It's funny, if you look at their posts, they're in Russian, but you can find them out on the dark web and places, and they're very open like social media posts. Translated to English, they call their victims clients, right? Which implies that they think they have a contractual relationship with these victims or clients. So they deliver on their part of the agreement, which is encrypting all the files, and then they expect their clients to deliver on their part, which is paying the ransom. And so, not only are they going to try to get a ransom through selling you the decrypt key, they're also going to threaten to dox you, right? So they're going to publicly release all of your stolen data out on the dark web. They're not going to be quiet about it. Like they'll go, if you don't pay, they'll go very public with the details about the compromise. They'll show some documents as proof. Some cases, they even threaten to tell the securities and financial regulators. So like, think about that. If you're if you're a publicly traded company and the word gets out that there's been a breach, your shareholders can rise up against you and sue you and things like that. So this allows them in some cases to get multiple extortion fees. And they have this, it's incredible, they have this affiliate, a program where they'll pay pen testers and red teamers to find exploits, like maybe up to 40% of the ransom. Now, if I'm a pen tester, how do I know I'm really getting paid 40% of the real ransom, or they're not just giving me like X, And when they advertise, it's funny, when they're recruiting, they're like, no slackers or scammers. We want people who are dedicated. Oh, and by the way, they try to say, the Maze group at least says that they don't go after schools, hospitals, airports, or government. Just greedy American corporations. But who knows? And sometimes they even do try to pay off insiders to get you may have read about, there was a Tesla, and this wasn't the Maze group, but this is another group. There was a Tesla employee who turned down $1 million to plant malware in the Tesla manufacturing plant. So they do sometimes try to get recruit insiders. All right, so some of the stuff you might see from Maze is it does establish persistence through a startup folder batch file. It does try to disable like IDA Pro and other types of tools that allow you to do malware reversing and analysis. It does do credential stealing through launching Mimikatz. If you're not familiar with Mimikatz, it's a great tool that allows you to scrape basically plain text passwords out of RAM. It uses PSExec and PowerShell to move laterally. So once you've gotten like one username and password that's a privileged admin level, you can just PSExec to other systems to spread the infection there. Command and control is actually using hard-coded IPs via HTTP. That's really not that sophisticated, right? I mean, that should be something you could easily look for if you know the domains to watch for on a block list. But of course, they change them so frequently, it's hard to keep up. They're registering hundreds or thousands of domains a day. For data collection and exfiltration, they're often using 7-zip and WinSCP. So they're looking for the important data, sensitive data, personally identifiable information, financials, product plans, stuff like that, IP, and then they're zipping it, and then they're going to use some kind of WinSCP or something to send it off to some cloud resource. From an impact standpoint, it is they're trying to clean up their tracks. They're making it as hard as they can for you to recover by deleting shadow volumes, stopping the SQL service so they encrypt databases and stuff like that. It's really pretty horrible. Well, Wilfredo, how much time do I have left? I have to know how quickly I should speak here.
So we want to leave some time for questions. I would probably give it about 10 more minutes.
Thanks very much. Perfect. Yeah, last year I was doing a talk on post-quantum cryptography, and I got so much into speaking about quantum computing that I left like 5 minutes at the end to actually talk about post-quantum cryptography. So I don't want that to happen this year. So this is a little like program campaign that we've been running. Whoops, sorry, pull that over here. Basically, I wrote a document about what it looks like to. Sorry, I'm pulling this up right now. What it looks like to run a digital forensics and incident response session, and so what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through that. Hold on one second. Apologies, I got my notes mixed up. Well, you know what? I'm gonna wing it here. So you guys, this is live without a net. I don't have my notes available, but I kind of know how this thing runs. So the first thing we do is usually we get a call about I don't know, 4 or 5 in the afternoon, because what happens is they got hit with ransomware. They see a message on their computer when they came in the morning. They probably got hit about midnight, and they come in, like 8 a.m. and all their files are encrypted. And by the way, this ransomware, the Maze ransomware, is very cheeky. They're like, they tell you what you did wrong, and like your security sucks, and you're just gonna have to live with it now. You're gonna have to send us a Bitcoin ransom to get your files back. And every single file that you have, is going to be turned into, an encrypted file, and they're going to leave these little text files around, with this warning, or this chiding you. Really, it's irksome, because they're like, you should have training for your people so they don't click on links and stuff like that. And it's like, but with their not so helpful security advice. Anyways, they we'll get the paperwork signed right away, NDA, MSA, and all that stuff, because we always want to sign our T's and C's before we get started on a DFIR cleanup. And we'll come to find out usually that they have been probably working on this themselves all day, running around with their hair on fire, because they didn't have any incident response plan, and they didn't know what they're doing, and they didn't know who to call. In some cases, they've already called a company about doing a negotiation, and they got a bit, like in this case, I'm conflating a bunch of stories together here of things that happened actually within like the last 6 months. But I'm not going to give you any details on who they are to protect the innocent, or I should say the victims. But the details are real. So in this case, this company does manufacturing and production and shipping and logistics of certain products. And by the way, if you look at the Maze ransomware attack vectors, it's across the board, but they do hit a lot of manufacturing operations, because they know these guys are not usually very sophisticated from an IT standpoint. They have a lot of OT, operational technology, and it's pretty easy to hit them and get them to pay, because they'll be completely shut down. They can't ship product, they can't receive payments, they can't do anything until they get unstuck from this ransomware situation. So in this case, this is exactly what happened to these guys. Their financial system was on this some kind of Oracle CRM or financial system, and they thought they were backing it up to the cloud. They weren't. As they say, the Schrodinger's law of backups is a backup is the state of a backup is only known until when you try to do a restore. And in this case, they realized they weren't actually doing what they thought they were doing. And the only backup they had was going to a NAS locally. And so the NAS also got encrypted along with the primary. So they had nothing. They had no financials going back for like 2 years, unfortunately. So they were dead in the water, and they had already reached out to a company about paying a ransom. And the attackers were asking for $2 million initially for the ransom. And these guys were offering $500,000. So they were like, what the heck? We're a fairly small manufacturing operation here. We don't want to pay that, and we don't know what we're doing. So they got in touch with us, and this is typically what happens. We get brought in at the end of the day after they've already tried all day and gotten nowhere. And so, always makes your spouse real happy when you start on a project at 7 or 8 in the evening. That's when you're starting on a thing, and then it kind of goes all night from there. And you're doing activities and you're trying to clean up. You're segmenting off systems. You're turning off systems. You're changing passwords. Now, in the olden days, when I taught forensics initially, digital forensics at USF probably 10 years ago, conventional wisdom was pull the plug, yank the hard drives, copy the hard, do a bit stream level copy of the hard drive, and then work off a copy. That's kind of old school because, let's face it, the goal of forensics now is not prosecution, because these people are coming in from Russia and North Korea or whatever, Iran. We're not going to have any reciprocity from a legal standpoint. We're not going to bring them to justice. So attribution, really not that important. Protecting integrity of the data, not that important really anymore. What we want to do is find out what happened, fix the problem, make sure it never happens again, and help them remediate. Okay, so that's usually the goal now. So in this case, we got involved and so we started looking at the thing, and there was 3 possibilities of how they got in. Now, we don't think it was phishing because we can look through, 0365 logs and see things like that. We can see if rules were created. We can see if people were logging in at odd times from odd places, and we didn't see any of that. But what we did see is they did have some deprecated servers. They had an Exchange server they're running. Even though they migrated Office 365 in the cloud, they were still running a deprecated version of Exchange because their CRM system needed to use that to send out messages. Okay, I don't know why it needed to do that. I don't know why they couldn't have a connector to an 0365 account, whatever. They just didn't know how to do it. And this is the case sometimes. You just don't have savvy IT people that know what they're doing. And then the other issue was they were running, and we've seen this numerous times. They had a company store that they had like logo and promotional items, polos, shot glasses, T-shirts and stuff, hats, where they're running it on they thought it was on the corporate intranet, but it was really exposed to the public internet. And it had this 1990s era, PHP code for an e-commerce system they were running. And so somebody came in and was able to pwn that thing. Once they get a foothold there, either through the deprecated Exchange server or the pwned web services, then they pivot from there into other parts of the system. All right. So it just kept going on and on. So what we immediately do is we deploy a solution that allows us to gather compromise information. So we can see, we look through registries, memcache, drop files, network connections, and all this stuff. We're able to gather that ephemeral data now because we wanted to know if somebody is still actively attacking them. If we look in memory, we can see if Mimikatz is there. We can see if other password scraping software and stuff like that is still resident in memory. That will tell us for sure, that there's an active attack going on. We can also see the stage data, as I was saying. The part of the MITRE attack framework is the collection and the exfiltration. We can see the stage data with the zips, the RARs, the 7 zips, and we can see the FTP, sessions out, that have. We can see if the horse is already, bolted out of the barn. All that stuff we can see. Let me fast forward to the end of the story. So we did engage. We had to engage with a third party to do the negotiation with the hackers. You always hear these guys have great customer service because they're real concerned about their reputation, and they don't want anybody to think that if they pay, they're not going to actually get the key and all that. But in some kind, their customer service is greatly overrated, in my opinion. So we've gotten, like we had to actually find them. The email address they gave us didn't work. It wasn't, we weren't getting any response. And finally, because of this group that we work with, they knew somebody else within the Maze ransomware group. They were able to get in touch with them, and finally were able to open the negotiations. It went back and forth. They made an offer of like 750,000. What you can do is you can say, I don't need all my files decrypted. I just need this one server decrypted, and you can pay less for that. I think this company ended up paying like $425,000 or something like that to get it. Think about this: working with these negotiation groups. The one we work with is all former law enforcement guys. They do a conflict of interest validation check with each thing, because Homeland Security, or maybe it was Justice Department last year, came out with this thing saying you can't negotiate with ransomware groups because you could be sponsoring terrorism, right? But there are certain ones you're allowed to work with that aren't state-sponsored terrorism or whatever. So, anyways, you have to do all that. But I always wonder if the negotiation group is in cahoots with the attackers by saying, victim, you give us $500,000 and we'll get your decrypt key. But then they go work with the attacker and they get the thing down to $400,000, and then they pocket the $100,000 themselves. Nobody would ever know. It's a completely unregulated industry, so all this could happen. So long and short, you don't want to find yourself ever in this situation of having to go through digital forensics investigation and cleanup. For the reason I said before, you're probably going to have to end up rebuilding your entire environment, deleting everything, low-level format of all your disks, restoring from backups. Oh, by the way, you may not have enough like virtual space available to do the decrypt, right? If you're decrypting all of your servers and files, you need an equivalent number of memory and storage available for those, and you may not have that available. In some cases, we have to cobble together, a little NAS from servers and backup storage to be able to do that. All right, so wrapping up, here's the stuff I recommend you should do now is ensure that you're not a victim by having adequate access controls in place with multi-factor authentication. Let's see, whitelisting, so you can only access remote access from trusted locations. Don't have so many admin accounts. We did an insurance company pen test, and I found that it had like 238 domain admin accounts. Like, why do you need that many? You shouldn't have that many. You should have very few, and they should be, heavily regulated. Vulnerability management. You can't actually turn on network level authentication that will makes people authenticate to a remote desktop session before you establish a real session. That will keep, cut down on the idea of a denial of service attack from brute force password guessing. Training to empower your users, segmentation, all that stuff. This is all the stuff that you really need to have in place. And then if you're looking to monitor, here's some kind of novel things that I would say look for. Any kind of privileged use, any kind of dropping of Metasploit or Cobalt Strike Beacon or Metasploit, any other kind of exploit frameworks, privileged use of PSExec, PowerShell, and any of these other tools that are often associated with malware and with ransomware. And then here's a little one for you. Get user default UI language function is a command always associated with Maze ransomware because they are attacking from another country, and so they're going to call this function to see where they are and what language is being used. Typically and I don't know if you have any software developers here, but typically you wouldn't use that function if you're developing in English for English speakers. This is kind of a giveaway that this is a remote attack. All right, a lot of information there. I'm going to be quiet and see if we can answer a couple of questions.
Perfect. And I think we actually have some questions. Paul, do you want to cover those questions?
Well, I'm going to just go ahead and look at the top ones in the list there. Coolest ransomware and increasing use of red teaming tools by ransomware groups. I mean, yeah, it's an alarming trend, but it's also, to us, it could be a method of detection, right? Yeah, all I have to do now is look for a signature of a Cobalt Strike or a Metasploit framework, and the use of that I can have either application whitelisting, or I can look for spawn processes or things that are associated with it. Now, of course, if they build a custom version of that from source code, then I can't do a signature-based search for that based on a hash or a file signature. But what I can do is look for behavior that's indicative of what Cobalt Strike or what Metasploit do. And you can certainly, all the modern endpoint protection like Cylance, Carbon Black, CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, any of these are going to have that capability to look for bad behavior versus just signatures. Any other questions? Let's see. I think ransomware has not run its course yet. It's still around. It's still a pandemic issue for us right now. We're still getting calls like all the time. So I don't see it going away anytime soon, as long as people are still paying. And so it's me. I have not been in the negotiation table myself. We always bring in a third party to do that. So that's why I'm leery of those guys, and I still have my suspicions that they're working together with the attackers.
So Jeremy, there's a question here that I think is good for everyone's sort of awareness, but they're asking advice on how to communicate this issues to clueless leadership. Sometimes there's that balance of not being able to talk to your leadership about these issues because they just truly don't understand. How do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, most of my job is education of C-level people on this issue, and they have to understand that cybersecurity is a business issue first, technology second. If you ask me how are you doing on cybersecurity, typically they're going to reach out to their IT folks and say, "Hey, how are we doing?" And guess what? Those people are not probably security experts, right? Usually, right? Or they're wearing multiple hats. They've got the responsibility for IT and IT security, so there's no separation of duties there. When I teach at USF, I don't let students grade their own papers, right? For a good reason. They're going to all give themselves A. So if IT is checking its own work, that's a problem. There's no separation of duties. So we try to frame it for them that way. Is you really need another set of eyes, checks and balances. You need this third-party team to come and watch what you're doing, to do the monitoring. I've probably done more than 500 or 600 audits myself over, for the government and commercial customers. And that's the one thing I usually see missing most of the time is visibility into your environment. Without the visibility, you don't know what's going on. You can have all the other protections in place, firewalls, endpoint protection, training for your people, policies and procedures. But if you don't have eyes on glass monitoring of what's going on, you can't say for sure today if somebody's inside your environment and how bad it is. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, that's great. I think we have time for probably one more question. And there is a lot of interesting questions, but one of the ones that I thought was interesting is, what are your thoughts for the next 2 to 5 years on the ransomware issue, and thoughts on cyber insurance and how that might impact the future?
Cyber breach insurance, I think, is necessary, but it's not a cure-all. And I would say it's backwards to think that you're going to go get cyber breach insurance and that's going to keep you covered. You can't even get the cyber breach insurance unless you have some level of due diligence in place. And guess what? They won't pay out on a breach if you weren't doing the things that you said you were doing, to even get the policy in the first place. Plus, we've also seen some situations where they won't pay out if it looks like what was done was perpetrated by a nation state, because then that's considered an act of war, and they get a clause that they don't have to pay if it's an act of war. So cyber breach insurance, I think, is great to as a safety net to cover anything that you made a mistake with, that you were really trying to do the right things. You had the best practices framework in place, but somebody made a mistake. But it should not drive bad behavior, and it should not be seen as a panacea, for a cure-all for everything. But it does work hand in hand with best practices. Next 2 to 5 years, I think, as I said, I don't see any abatement of ransomware happening anytime soon because it is so successful. And think about this: if these groups are making billions of dollars a year, they have a business enterprise with affiliate programs, threat hunters, red teaming, a great organization of separation of duties in their organization. If they took a little bit of money that they made off the ransoms and poured it back into R&D themselves, just like a regular company would, let's just say 5 to 10%, they could come up with some great tools and practices that are even more advanced and more effective to be able to sidestep emerging defenses, right? So I think we're probably going to see that. Right now, up till now, I haven't seen any like really smart, AI-based vulnerability, probing and bots, bots or worms or anything like that. But I think it's on the horizon. Computers are pretty good, AIs are pretty good at crunching numbers and finding low-hanging fruit in terms of vulnerability. They're not as smart yet at finding complex ones, but there's enough. I think we've been pretty clear about this. You don't have to be that stealth. You don't have to be that smart or that clever to get stuff by most people if they're not watching, which a lot of companies are not. So you got to have the visibility. But I think the future we're going to see is, attackers will get smarter by pouring R&D money into AI and other things that are going to help them sidestep some of the defenses that we have in place now.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that covers all the questions. All right. I think you have a few more moments. We could probably wrap this up. And thank you so much, Jeremy, for coming to speak with us today. And that's all I got for now.
Thanks everybody for joining. I think we're part of a scavenger hunt, but if not, I'm just gonna put my website there. In the blog section of my website, there is a CTF mini challenge. Whoever solves that first, and it's fairly difficult. I don't know if you've ever, there's a little bit of a forensics challenge there. If you can solve that, we will send you a prize for that. So go to that website, and in the blog section of my website, there is a mini CTF challenge. All right, have fun.